Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiriye Nashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistike. So continuing with the discussion on Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita by Satsvarup Das Goswami, Volume 2, Planting the Seed, New York City, 1965 to 1966, Chapter 13, Butler, Pennsylvania, the first testing ground. So Prabhupada had reached Butler. His sponsor, Gopal Agarwal, had come to Pittsburgh to pick him up. So at midnight, they reached Butler. September 20th, Butler, Pennsylvania, home of the Jeep. Read a granite plaque in the city park. Butler, famous as a town where the US Army Jeep was invented in 1940, was an industrial city of 20,000 settled amid the hills of an area rich in oil, coal, gas, and limestone. Its industry consisted mainly of factories for plate glass, railroad cars, refrigerators, oil equipment, and rubber goods. 90% of the local laborers were Native Americans. The nominal religion had always been Christian, mostly Protestant with some Catholic, and in later years a few synagogues had appeared. But there was no Hindu community at that time. Gopal Agarwal was the first Indian to move to Butler. As a Volkswagen bus pulled into town, the pre-dawn air was warm and humid. The morning edition of the Butler Eagle would soon be going to the newsstands. Read Chinese fire on India. Prime Minister Shastri declares Chinese communists out to dominate world. United Nations Council demands Pakistan and India cease fire in 48 hours. So this was, yes, 1965, the war was going on. Srila Prabhupada arrived at Agarwal's home, Sterling Apartments, at 4 a.m. and Gopal invited him to sleep on the couch. Their place, a townhouse apartment, consisted of a small living room, a dining room, a kitchenette, 2 upstairs bedrooms, and a bath. Here they lived with their 2 young children. The Agarwals had lived in Butler for a few years now and felt themselves established in a good social circle. Since the apartment had so little space, they decided it would be better if the Swami took a room at YMCA and came to visit them during the day. Of course, living space wasn't the real difficulty. It was him. How would he fit into the Butler atmosphere? He was a guest, so they would have to explain him to their friends and neighbors. Srila Prabhupada was immediately a curiosity for whoever saw him. In anxiety, Mrs. Agarwal decided that instead of having people speculate about the strange man in orange robes living at her house, it would be better to let them know about him from the newspapers. She explained her plan to Prabhupada, who laughed, understanding that he did not fit in. Sally hurried off to a Pittsburgh newspaper office, but the interviewer was unable to comprehend why this person should make an interesting story. Sally then took him to the local Butler Eagle, where his presence was accepted as indeed newsworthy. So different newspapers. September 22nd, a feature article appeared in the Butler Eagle. Influent English devotee of Hindu cult explains commission to visit the West. A photographer had come to the Agarwal's apartment and had taken a picture of Srila Prabhupada standing in the living room, holding an open volume of Srimad Bhagavatam. The caption read, Ambassador of Bhakti Yoga. The article began, a slight brown man in faded orange drapes and wearing white bathing shoes stepped out of a compact car yesterday and into the Butler YMCA to attend a meeting. He is A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swamiji, a messenger from India to the peoples of the West. The article referred to Srimad Bhagavatam as biblical literature and to Srila Prabhupada as a learned teacher. It continued, my mission is to revive a people's God consciousness. Says the Swamiji, God is the father of all living beings in thousands of different forms. He explains, human life is a stage of perfection in evolution. If we miss the message, back we go through the process again. He believes Bhaktivedanta lives as a monk, permits no women to touch his food. On a 6-week ocean voyage, and at the Agarwal's apartment in Butler, he prepares his meals in a brass pan with separate levels for steaming rice, vegetables, and making bread at the same time. He's a strict vegetarian and is permitted to drink only milk, the miracle food for babies and old men, he noted. If Americans would give more attention to their spiritual life, they would be much happier, he says. So this YMCA, Young Man Christian Association, this was a building, and actually I happened to be there once. Was passing by Butler, so I had to stop in and went there. And the lady at the reception, she showed the register where Prabhupada had signed his name when he came. So this was a place where all the men would live in this YMCA. It's like a big hostel. So Prabhupada would go there in the evening and spend the night there, sleep there, and come to Gopal's house in the morning. So much of austerity, especially for Prabhupada, for Swamiji. It's amazing what he went through. The Agarwals had their own opinion as to why Prabhupada had come to America, to finance his books and nothing more. They were sure that he was hoping only to meet someone who could help him with the publication of his Srimad Bhagavatam, and that he did not want any followers. At least they hoped he wouldn't do anything to attract attention, and they felt that this was his mentality also. He did not create waves. Sally Agarwal says he didn't want any crowd. He didn't want anything. He only wanted to finance his books. Perhaps Prabhupada, seeing their nervousness, agreed to keep a low profile out of consideration for his hosts. At Prabhupada's request, however, Mr. Agarwal held a kind of open house in his apartment every night from 6 to 9. Sally. It was quite an intellectual group that we were in, and they were fascinated by him. They hardly knew what to ask him. They didn't know enough. This was just like a dream out of a book. Who would expect to meet a Swami in someone's living room in Butler, Pennsylvania? It was just really tremendous. In the middle of middle-class America, my parents came from quite a distance to see him. We knew a lot of people in Pittsburgh, and they came up. This was a very unusual thing, having him here. But the real interest shown in him was only as a curiosity. He had a typewriter, which was one of his few possessions, and an umbrella. That was one of the things that caused a sensation, that he always carried an umbrella. And it was a little chilly, and he was balding, so he always wore his hat that someone had made for him, like a swimming cap. It was again kind of sensation. And he was so brilliant that when he saw someone twice, he knew who they were. He remembered. He was a brilliant man. Or if he met them in our apartment and saw them in a car, he would remember their name and he would wave and say their name. He was a brilliant man. All the people liked him. They were amazed at how intelligent he was. The thing that got them was the way he remembered their name and his humorous way. He looked so serious all the time. But he was a very humorous person. He was forbidding in his looks, but he was very charming. He was the easiest guest I have had in my life, because when I couldn't spend time with him, he chanted, and I knew he was perfectly happy. When I couldn't talk to him, he chanted. He was so easy, though, because I knew he was never bored. I never felt any pressure or tension about having him. He was so easy that when I had to take care of the children, he would just chant. It was so great. When I had to do things, he would be just happy, chanting. He was a very good guest. When the people would come, they were always smoking cigarettes. But he would say, pay no attention. Think nothing of it. That's what he said. Think nothing of it. because he knew we were different. I didn't smoke in front of him. I knew I wasn't supposed to smoke in front of Gopal's father. So I sort of considered him the same. He didn't make any problems for anybody. One evening, a guest asked Prabhupada, "What do you think of Jesus Christ?" And Prabhupada replied, "He is the Son of God." Then he added that he, the guest, who was also a son of God. Everyone was interested to hear that Swami accepted Jesus Christ as the Son of God. Gopal. His intent was not to have you change your way of life. He wasn't telling anybody they should be vegetarian or anything. All he wanted you to do was to follow what you are, but be better. He didn't stress that we should give up many things. That was really remarkable. This is how Prabhupada approached, or Prabhupada let people accept Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness, bhakti, spirituality, whatever we want to call it. He did not stress anything. Even when he had ISKCON established, first initiation, he gave the initiation, and after initiation said, "By the way, you have to follow these four regulative principles." Not before he said that. Srila Prabhupada followed a regulated daily schedule. Every morning he would walk the 6 or 7 blocks from the YMCA to Sterling Apartments, arriving there about 7. When he had first landed in New York, he had in his luggage a large bundle of dried cereals, similar to rolled oats. This supply was enough for several weeks, and every morning at breakfast, he would take some with milk. At 7:45, Gopal would leave for work, and around 9:30, Prabhupada would start preparing his lunch in the kitchen. He made his chapatis by hand without even a rolling pin. He worked alone for 2 hours while Mrs. Agarwal did household work and took care of her children. At 11:30, he took prasadam, Sally. When he cooked, he used only one burner. The bottom level pot created the steam. He had the dal on the bottom, and it created the steam to cook many other vegetables. So for about a week, he was cooking this great big lunch, which was ready about 11:30. And Gopal always came home for lunch about 12. I used to serve Gopal a sandwich, and then he would go back to work. But it didn't take me long to realize that the food the Swami was cooking, we would enjoy too. So he started cooking that noon meal for all of us. Oh, and we enjoyed it so much. Our fun was to show him what we know of America, and he had never seen such things. It was such fun to take him to the supermarket. He loved opening the package of okra or frozen beans and didn't have to clean them and cut them and to do all those things. He opened the freezer every day and just chose his items. It was fun to watch him. He sat on the couch while I swept with the vacuum cleaner. And he was so interested in that. And we talked for a long time about that. He was so interesting. So every day we would have this big feast, and everything was great fun. We really enjoyed it. It would help him cut the things. I would help him cut the things. He would spice us, and we would laugh. He was the most enjoyable man, most enjoyable. I really felt that a sort of daughter to him, even in such a short. Like he was my father-in-law. He was friend of many father-in-law. He was friend of my father, sorry, my father-in-law. But I really felt very close to him. He enjoyed everything. I liked him. I thought he was tremendous. After lunch, Prabhupada would leave about 1 p.m. and walk to the YMCA, where the Agarwals figured he must have worked at his writing until 5. He would come back to their apartment about 6 in the evening after they had taken a meal. They ate meat, so Mrs. Agarwal was careful to have it cleared away before he came. When one night he came early, she said, "Oh, Swamiji, we have just cooked meat, and the smell must be very disagreeable to you." But he said, "Oh, think nothing of it. Think nothing of it." Wow. In the evening, he would speak with guests. The guests would usually take coffee and other refreshments, but he would request a glass of warm milk at 9 o'clock. He would say, speaking until 9:30 or 10, and then Mr. Agarwal would drive him back to the YMCA. Prabhupada would also do his own laundry every day. He washed his clothes in the Agarwal's bathroom and hung them to dry outside. He sometimes accompanied the Agarwals to the laundromat and was interested to see how Americans washed and dried their clothes. To Sally, he seemed very interested in the American ways and people. Sally. Our boy Braj was 6 or 7 months old when the Swamiji came, and the Indians love boys. The Swami liked Braj. He was there when Braj first stood. The first time Braj made the attempt and actually succeeded, the Swami stood up and clapped. It was a celebration. Another time, our baby teethed on the Swami's shoes. I thought, oh, those shoes, they have been all over India. My kid is chewing on them. You know how a mother would feel. Almost every night he used to sit in the next door neighbor's backyard. We sat out there, sometimes with him, or we stayed in the living room. One time something happened with the little girl Kamla, who was only 3 years old. I used to take her to Sunday school and she learned about Jesus in Sunday school. Then when she would see Swamiji with his robes on and everything, she called him Swami Jesus. And this one time when it first dawned on us what she was saying, she called him Swami Jesus. And Swamiji smiled and said, and a little child should lead them. It was so funny. Prabhupada spoke to various groups in the community. He spoke at the Lions Club in early October and received a formal document. Be it known that A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami was a guest at the Lions Club of Butler, Pennsylvania. And as an expression of appreciation for services rendered, the club tenders this acknowledgement. He also gave a talk at the Y. St. Fidelis Seminary College in Herman, Pennsylvania, and he spoke regularly to guests at Agarwal's home. So, different engagements, but yes, this wasn't his final destination. But Prabhupada, again, he was just patiently waiting for the new opportunity. He knew Krishna has something in plan, and it will be revealed at the right time. When Professor Larson, the chairman of the philosophy department at the Slippery Rock State College, read in the Butler Eagle of a visiting Indian Swami and Vedic scholar, he phoned Agarwal's home to invite Prabhupada to lecture on campus. Alan Larson, I called the number given in the newspaper article, but it turned out that the Swamiji was actually staying in a room at the YMCA. When I arrived, he was waiting on the street corner and I picked him up. He seemed very much alone. When we were driving to Slippery Rock, I asked him to pronounce his name for me so I would have it right. When I introduced him to my class, he said, Swamiji Bhaktivedanta. And then he proceeded to tell me what that meant. Since I was not used to Indian names, he had to repeat it several times before I got it right. He showed no impatience with my slowness. Even at this early junction of our association, I was convinced that this man had an inner stability and strength that would be very difficult to shake. And this initial impression was further reinforced throughout the rather busy day. Now, see the difference. There is actually some things, or many things here are great. I would say great, not just good, they're great. Like this Professor Larson, chairman of the philosophy department of Slippery Rock State College. He himself came to pick Prabhupada up. And he organized Prabhupada's lecture in his class. And just after reading something in newspaper about him. And he's trying to learn how to pronounce Prabhupada's name properly in the class. Can you imagine some professor in India doing that? I don't know. So here, even if somebody is a professor, could be a dean, could be anybody, they like to do things on their own. They don't have we don't have servants here anyway, or drivers, or this. But again, on the other hand, they like to do things by themselves. It's a really great quality, actually. 100 students from several classes had gathered to hear the lecture as Prabhupada, in his natural, unrehearsed manner, walked down the aisle, up the 3 wooden steps, and onto the plain wooden stage. He sat down, erect and cross-legged, and began softly singing Hare Krishna, his eyes closed. Then his student spoke without a lectern or microphone and answered questions from the audience. The program lasted only 50 minutes and ended abruptly with a bell signaling the next class. Alan Larson. After the first class, I had a short conversation with the Swamiji while sitting outside on a bench on the campus lawn. Most of the time, he was not directly engaged in conversation. He would repeat a short prayer while moving prayer beads through his fingers. He was sitting up cross-legged, and we were speaking back and forth. He said that the trees around us were beautiful, and he asked, "What kind of trees are these?" I replied, "They're shade trees." Then he said that it was too bad they were not fruits or nut trees to provide food and benefit people. At 1 o'clock, Prabhupada lectured again. Afterward, he accompanied Dr. Mohan Sharma, a member of the faculty who had attended the lecture, and his 16-year-old daughter, Minnie, to Dr. Sharma's campus residence. Prabhupada accepted warm milk and dried fruit, and at Dr. Sharma's request, blessed his home and touched the forehead of his daughter in a gesture of benediction. Around 3 o'clock, Professor Larson drove him back to Butler. Alan Larson, the Swamiji seemed to present himself as an Indian scholar who had come for a short time to do translation work. I never thought of him as a missionary, but during the course of the day, there grew in me a warm affection for this man because he was unmistakably a good man who had found his way to a stability and peace that is very rare. The lectures in Pennsylvania gave Prabhupada his first readings of how his message would be received in America. At Commonwealth Pier in Boston, he had stated in his poem, "I'm sure that when this transcendental message penetrates their hearts, they will certainly feel gladdened and thus become liberated from all unhappy conditions of life." Now, this principle was actually being tested in the field. Would they be able to understand? Further interested? Would they surrender? It remains to be seen. October 15. Srila Prabhupada received a letter from Sumati Mukherjee in Bombay. Pujya Swami, I am in due receipt of a letter dated 24th ultimo and glad to know that you have safely reached the USA after suffering from seasickness. I thank you for your greetings and blessings. I know by now you must have recovered fully from the sickness and must be keeping good health. I was delighted to read that you have started your activities in the States and have already delivered some lectures. I pray to Lord Balkrishna to give you enough strength to enable you to carry the message of Srimad Bhagavatam. I feel that you should stay there until you fully recover from your illness and return only after you have completed your mission. Here everything is normal. With respects, yours sincerely, Sumati Mukherjee. Prabhupada regarded the last line of this letter as especially significant. His well-wisher was urging him to stay in America until he had completed his mission. He had told the immigration officials in New York that he would be staying in America for 2 months. I have 1 month's sponsorship in Butler, he thought, and then I have no support. So perhaps I can stay another month. So he had said 2 months. Sumati Mukherjee, however, was urging him to stay on. He saw that the prospects of preaching to the Americans were good, but he felt he would need support from India. At any rate, he had spent long enough in Butler, and he now had 1 month left in America. So he decided to go to New York City and try to preach there before his time was up. But first he wanted to visit Philadelphia, where he had arranged a meeting with a Sanskrit professor, Dr. Norman Brown at the University of Pennsylvania. Mrs. Agarwal was sorry to see him go. Sally, after a month, I really loved the song. I felt protective in a way, and he wanted to go to Philadelphia. But I couldn't imagine, I told him. I could not imagine him going to Philadelphia for 2 days. He was going to speak there and then to New York. But he knew no one in New York. If the thing did not plan out in Philadelphia, he was just going to New York. And then there was no one. I just couldn't imagine. It made me sick. But Prabhupada was on a mission. I remember the night he was leaving, about 2 in the morning. I remember sitting there as long as he could wait before Gopal took him to Pittsburgh to get on that bus. Gopal got a handful of change, and I remember telling him how to put the money in the slot so that he could take a bath at the bus station, because he was supposed to take a bath few times a day. And Gopal told him how to do that and told him about the automats in New York. He told him what he could eat and what he couldn't eat. And he gave him these coins in a sock. And that's all he left us with. As a sannyasi, Srila Prabhupada was used to picking up and leaving one place for another. As a mendicant preacher, he had no remorse about leaving behind the quiet life of Butler YMCA. And he had no attachment for the domestic habitat, where he would cook and talk with Sally Agarwal about vacuum cleaners, frozen foods, and American ways. But why had he gone to Butler? And why was he going to New York? He saw it as Krishna's grace, as a pure devotee of Krishna. He wanted to be an instrument for distributing Krishna consciousness. His stay in Butler had been helpful. He had gotten first-hand experience of American life. And he gained confidence that his health was strong and his message communicable. He was glad to see that America had the necessary ingredients for his Indian vegetarian diet, and the people could understand his English. He had learned that casual one-time lectures here and there were of limited value, and that although there would be opposition from the established religions, people individually were very much interested in what he had to say. On October 18th, he left Butler via Philadelphia for New York City. Thus ends chapter 13. So we'll take up chapter 14 tomorrow. See, anybody has any questions or comments?
प्रभु जी आज विजयादशमी है, तो कुछ लाइंस आज बोल दीजिए.
Yeah, Vijayadashmi, very, very important day. जब भगवान राम की रावण से लड़ाई हो रही थी, तो रावण को ब्रह्मा जी का आशीर्वाद था ना कि उसका जब भी एक सिर कट के गिरेगा तो नया सिर उसकी जगह निकल आएगा, तो 10 सिर उसके बराबर रहेंगे. तो रावण जो है रिप्रेजेंट करता है जैसे हमारे हृदय में जो वासना है, लस्ट है, उसको. और वो वासना ऐसी ही होती है, मतलब कहीं हमें कुछ फ्रस्ट्रेशन मिलता है, वासना क्या मतलब इंद्रिय तृप्ति और कुछ नहीं. कहीं फ्रस्ट्रेशन मिलता है तो हम छोड़ के दूसरी इंद्रिय तृप्ति में लग जाते हैं, तो ये वाला सिर फिर से निकल आता है. मरता नहीं है, खत्म नहीं हो जाता, क्योंकि वो डिजायर्स तो दिल में है ना. तो रावण का भी ऐसे हो रहा था, तो भगवान बार बार उसके सिर को काट रहे थे. तो विभीषण ने पूछा कि भगवान आप जानते हो इसकी मृत्यु सिर काटने से नहीं होगी. भगवान कहते मैं जानता हूं कि इसके हृदय में जो है तीर मारना पड़ेगा. पर दिक्कत ये है कि इसके हृदय में ये सीता जी के बारे में सोच रहा है, और सोचना मतलब सीता जी इसके हृदय में बैठी है, चाहे वो चाहे या ना चाहे, क्योंकि वो उन्हीं के बारे में सोच रहे, वो इसके हृदय में है। और सीता जी मेरे बारे में सोचती हैं, तो मैं सीता के हृदय में हूँ। और मैं पूरे संसार में अपने सारे भक्तों के बारे में सोचता हूँ, तो सारे भक्त मेरे हृदय में। तो मैं अगर इसके हृदय में तीर मारता हूँ तो सीता जी को लगेगा, फिर मेरे को, फिर मेरे सारे भक्तों को। तो इसलिए नहीं। तो भगवान राम उसके सिरों को काटते रहे, तो अंत में आके वो झुंझला गया है, क्या मेरे सिर को काट रहे हैं बार बार बार। और जैसे ही वो झुंझलाया तो उसके हृदय से सीता निकल गई, क्योंकि उस सीता जी के बारे में सोचना उसने छोड़ दिया, क्यों अब अपने बारे में सोच रहा था। तो जैसे ही भगवान ने वो देखा कि अब सीता जी उसके हृदय में नहीं है, तभी वो कौन सा तीर था, आदित्य हृदय, भगवान को वन में दिया था, मेरे को याद नहीं किस ऋषि ने दिया था, वो तीर मारा रावण के हृदय में। और तब रावण जो है अपना रथ छोड़ के फिर वो गिर गया था। तो मतलब ये है कि वो इंद्रिय तृप्ति की वासनाएं तो हम सबके हृदय में, सबके है, और उसको खत्म भगवान ही कर सकते हैं। अब वो तीर मार के हम खत्म करवाना चाहें या भगवान का नाम लेके, जैसे भगवान हमारे हृदय में बैठे, तो ये हमारे ऊपर है। तो तो असली असली तरीका तो यही है, भगवान का नाम ले, भगवान की सेवा पूजा करें, ताकि भगवान हमारे में हृदय में बैठे, और वो वासनाओं, रावण जो वासनाओं का रूप है उसको खत्म करें, भगवान बैठे। जैसे हनुमान जी के हृदय में थे, सीता राम बैठे थे, उन्होंने तो सीना खोल के भी दिखा दिया था। तो वो भक्ति है, वो सेवा। अगर भगवान की सेवा, भगवान सीता को भगवान से मिलाने की इच्छा है और सीता राम की सेवा करने की इच्छा, तो वो इच्छा ठीक है। हनुमान जी ने भगवान की सेवा की, सीता जी को राम से मिलाया, और रावण जो है सीता जी को राम से अलग करने की कोशिश कर। तो दोनों में जो ग्रेट है वो हम जानते हैं, हनुमान जी ही हैं, क्योंकि उनकी पूजा तो पूरे पूरे संसार में ही होती है। तो वो चीज चाहिए हमें, वो वही चाहिए, वही आज प्रार्थना करनी चाहिए भगवान से, हमें वो सेवा दीजिए। ठीक है, हरे कृष्ण।
थैंक यू सो
आपकी
मच।
आवाज, थैंक यू। चलो, you all have a safe and wonderful day. Hare Krishna, Jai Shri Ram.
हरे कृष्णा, जय श्री
Hare
राम।
Krishna. Thank you.